Welcome to the New Money Habits Podcast, where we talk about how to create a better plan for your money so you don't have to live paycheck to paycheck. Here are your hosts, Sarah Jones and Nino Villa.
Welcome back, Budgeteers. Coach Nino Villa here. And alongside of me, my partner on the airways, as always, Sarah Jones. And we have a special guest with us today, one of the partners, founding partners at New Money Habits, Maria Casillas. But I'm going to start with you, Sarah. I think, if memory serves, you're still in Arizona, but where are you at? What you doing?
I am in Arizona, and I am wearing a sweater today because, gosh darn it, this is chilly. My hands are cold this morning, Nino.
Sorry, we did that whole bait and switch. We sold you a bag of goods that were the warm, like Valley of the Heat, Valley of the Sun. That just not. We're not holding to that right now.
No, and I feel like, well, I will say this is warmer than it is in Colorado. Very thankful they have snow there. I am shoveling sunshine here, not snow, so I will take the sunshine, even though it's a little bit chilly. There's no snow on the ground, so that's a win for me.
Yes, and I have family back in Buffalo, New York, who are dealing with 6+ feet of snow. 6 feet. I'm 6 feet tall. The snow is taller than I am.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It is crazy. Who on earth would choose to live in that kind of environment? Not I. Not I.
1, 2, 3, not it. Right?
Right. Nose goes, right?
Well, as I said at the top, we have a special guest with us today, one of the founding partners at New Money Habits, Maria Casillas. Hi, Maria, and welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Always a pleasure to have you on when we can get you on. And one of the reasons we wanted to have you on today is because I'm just going to be a little self-deprecating for just a second. This is not an area of my coaching in which I excel, but I know that you and Sarah both do. And that is really talking to people about their values and how those values truly drive their behavior with money. Now, to my credit, I talk to people about their goals all the time, and we always kind of focus on what are your goals and why are those your goals. But I've just never taken it to the depth that I know you and Sarah can. And so I'm really excited to have you on today and have you and Sarah kind of lead a conversation about really understanding our values and understanding, like I said, how those values drive our behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a fun topic for me. It's something that I think I read something somewhere, and I started just applying a lot of that. I like to take things that I learn and start applying according to how my clients need things. And this has been kind of a birth of that for me, at least. And I'm guessing probably similarly for Sarah. So it's been really, really great. People are responding very well to it. I think it's something that is grossly missed in the financial coaches arena myself. So happy to be here to talk about it.
I would agree with that too. And I'd even almost take it a little bit of a step further, that when I applied it to my own life, the huge differences that it made for me. And it just allowed me to look at how I was spending and investing money right before, and the things that didn't feel right. And when I started looking at my true values and started having my actions be in alignment with those values, how much it really changed for me. And then it gave me language to use with my clients, right? And the people that I'm working with. And so applying it to my own life too, as well as theirs, huge game changer for me personally.
So what are we talking about then when we talk about really kind of understanding the values? Like I said, I mean, I talk to clients all the time about what financial goals they have, and we kind of figure out why those goals are important, whether it's saving to buy a house or to get out of debt. But like I said, you guys are kind of taking it a step further. So what does that look like? What are we really talking about?
Oh,
I can take it if you want. My response to that, my initial response to that is a clarification. And that is that a lot of times I think when we talk about values, people start to they start to think that we're talking about priorities. And there is a difference between the two. And now they do go very much hand in hand. And it's not like one usually is not seen without the other. However, when I am doing what I call a values audit with one of my either clients or potential clients, what we find is I won't even give definitions of values. I won't give definitions of priorities. I basically just ask the questions. And the reason for that is because I want to see where their head is with that just to begin with. So I might say, like, what are your top 3 values? And they will list things such as, family and freedom and maybe their home, right? And then we'll ask what their top 3 priorities are. And most of the time they look at me and go, didn't you just ask me that? Like, isn't that the same question? And even in one of our Facebook groups, we had a coach who was listening to the podcast that I'm a host on and kind of said, I don't understand this whole values thing. Like, isn't my family a value, And so it's important, I think, to have that conversation for the distinction between values and priorities. So personally, when we talk about values, we're talking about some of those core things that are important to you. They give you an idea of, what is most important in your life in terms of things like authenticity or determination or curiosity or creativity, spirituality, stability, success, things that are not things, more like concepts or ideas or things that we're aspiring to. Not necessarily the people, places, and things, even though we value people, places, and things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. As you're kind of outlining that, I'm thinking about like one of the things that I value that is not a thing, it's an intangible, is honesty.
Mm-hmm.
Honesty is probably one of the things I value the most in life. But yeah, that's not a tangible thing. It's not a widget.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know that you value honesty?
One is I try my darndest to always be as open and transparent and as honest as I can be. And so it's just a behavior of mine. And then I know that I'm very appreciative when somebody is being honest with me.
Okay. So that last part, that's kind of what I was getting at. You feel a certain way when someone is being honest with you. And my guess is that you also feel a certain way when someone is being dishonest with you.
Yes.
How do you feel when someone's being dishonest with you?
Oh, yeah. That's incredibly frustrating. Apparently I can't even put it into words. That's just how turned off I am by dishonesty and dishonest people.
And the reason I bring that up, Nino, is because I think what you said before was that it's just a behavior of yours. And while your behavior has been formed around that value, that's not necessarily how you know that that's a value. And so I think it's important to check in with your thoughts and your feelings when someone is being honest with you and when someone's being dishonest with you. How does your conscience feel when you're being dishonest with somebody? How does your conscience feel when you are being honest with someone? It's just an important, kind of like a gut check to figure out, is that something that is one of my core values? And so I'm really thrilled to hear that your behavior has come around that and that you've formed your behavior around that value. And I just want to make sure that your listeners don't think that just because they do something all the time, that's the easiest way to define their value. Try that gut check. See how that emotional reaction is when it's being done to you and you're doing it to somebody else.
I would also add too that it's okay, and this might be jumping ahead just a little bit, but it's okay if some of those values change over time, right? Because we get into different seasons, and I think some of our values change, and I think sometimes we try and hold on to those things thinking that we have to carry those into our future, and the truth is we don't. So tapping into that gut check, really asking ourselves and digging in, as you said, Maria, I think is important, because as we grow and as we become different people, our values might very well change as well. Some might become a little bit more important than other ones. And so it's okay to have those change, but really tapping into the way that you feel, that gut check again. I don't think we use that enough. I think that's a tool that we don't use enough when we're talking about all different types of areas of life, right? So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that, there's a ton of actual values. And while you may start to display them, inherit them, whatever the right word is for that, throughout your life, those core values might be the things that change. So while you may be trustworthy throughout your life, maybe that is not one of the most core values. And we all know that you only have a few core ones, otherwise nothing is core, right? Nothing's a priority. You can't have priorities for everything, otherwise nothing becomes priority. So, with that being said, I think what you're saying, Sarah, like I kind of believe that some values have a compound effect, where you kind of layer them as you go from when you're a child into adolescence, into young adulthood. And I mean, you see all the way through, till people are 100 years old, their values are probably layering, and they're probably fantastic people by the time they get to that spot. But their core values might be those things that have been shifting and changing throughout. So great point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Maria, you mentioned a values audit. And then you talked about like values being different than priorities. So where does that conversation often lead?
It leads mostly to an understanding of the difference. The priorities are more along the lines of those people, places, and things that we prioritize. That's we're able to be able to put things, set our goals according to that. And then we look at what are those core values that they have after we have some discussion about that, what that really means, and start to identify what those core values are. And the reason for that as a financial coach is for me to be able to help them spend, save, and invest according to those said values. I just think so often, I think Sarah actually alluded to it earlier, that when we are just looking at numbers, a lot of times it's just, how much do you have coming in? How much do you have going out? And here's the difference. Sometimes it's a negative difference and sometimes it's a positive difference. And when we try to figure out what to do, whether we're investing the money that's extra or left over, or figuring out what to, air quotes, cut back on when it comes to the money that has that shortfall, if we don't really take into account what's important to ourselves and to, in this case, our clients, we're not really helping them. And so anybody who's listening today, you realize that yes, there are going to be things that you need to cut back on if you have that deficit. But don't just cut back on the things that everyone else around you is telling you need to cut back on. You get to make your decisions based on what is going to serve you and your family well. And it's not just that like self-centered, this feels good in the moment type of thing. It's actually, you're actually looking forward, but using the values as a lens through which to look.
Mm. I love that, because I think that, oftentimes I find that people are, and I'll just use the term spending mindlessly, right? Because they're not really pulling in their values, and then therefore they think they've got priorities, but because the priorities aren't aligned with their values, it feels like this misalignment, right? And it feels very overwhelming, and it feels, and they get into these habits of spending just because that's the way they've always done it, and they don't feel like they know a difference. They don't feel like they know a different way. And so when you start to look at, okay, what are my core values? And then what are my priorities? And then you start to spend and invest. I'm going to pull in the word investing, because I think that money going out is not only a spend, but it's an investment in your future too, in a lot of different ways. And so I want to pull that term in a little bit more. But when people are able to do that, it starts to take away some of that overwhelm, because it just starts to feel better. And that gets back to that gut check. They start to feel better about where their money is going, because they know that they're spending it in ways that it feels right. It's in alignment with their values. It's in alignment with their priorities. And it makes those choices of, call it cutting back. I just call it adjusting where the money is going. It makes those choices seem a little bit easier, right? Mm-hmm. That it doesn't feel as hard. It doesn't feel like, hey, I'm cutting back on something, I'm depriving myself. It really feels like, dang, this feels nice. Like, whoo, what a weight off my shoulders to look at my numbers and have it actually feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Nino, you had asked a little bit ago about like when we start looking at those priorities, what does that look like? And I mentioned at the top of the podcast that when we these things go hand in hand. So for example, if you have a value of adventure, like that's one of your core values is adventure, then when you're creating your budget, it's okay to include things that allow for said adventure. And you might not really care about stability. Maybe that's not one of your core values. And so if you don't really care about stability, but you are all about adventure, then your budget's going to look very different from, the father whose core value is stability for his family. And, maybe they'll go on a little vacation here or there, but if he has to choose between those two right now, he's choosing stability over adventure. And there's nothing wrong with either one of those, but the discussion has to be made with both things in consideration.
I really appreciate that as an example. And I'll offer up another one because as Sarah was kind of outlining that process of spending in alignment with your values, I'm thinking about how when I started my new money habits and I was kind of just committed to, I have to get out of debt, right? Like I have to get out of debt. Like that is a priority. It's a must. I must get out of debt. But halfway through my paying off of debt, there was a conflict in kind of my priorities and my values. I was staring out at the backyard. I know I've shared this story on the podcast before, but I'm staring out at the backyard thinking to myself, there's 2,200 square feet of untapped potential out there for my family to enjoy, for me to spend time with the kids, for the kids to get outside and just kind of enjoy a safe place. And so I paused my debt elimination plan and said, you know what, I'm going to invest in a backyard. And so, Sarah, I really appreciate that you brought that term to the forefront, right? Like that was an investment. That was an investment in my family. Yes, it was an investment in the property as well. So like down the road, it'll add value to the resale or whatever. But that really was an investment in something that I held as a core value, and that is quality time spent with the family. So just another example of how you might see priorities one way. And like I said at the top, as a financial coach, I'm usually like, all right, so your goal is getting out of debt. Like we're just going to drill towards that. But I have an appreciation for, well, hold on. Sometimes other things that are more important and have more value need to take priority in that moment.
And if I may, since you brought up your own debt-free journey, I'm gonna throw mine in there as well, and actually tell you that we didn't tap the brakes on ours because at the moment I was after like challenge, determination, dedication, like those, they weren't necessarily my core values, but that was what it was wrapped up into. And I went so. I was trying not to say something that's not appropriate. I went so to the wall.
Pedal to the metal.
Yep, we'll go with that one. Pedal to the metal. That's right. I would make, honest to goodness, 48-cent payments to a credit card. And I wish that I was exaggerating right now. I'm not. I actually did that one time. But for me, it was the game. It was the challenge of just getting it done. And when I did, I got to the end of that, and there was this very lackluster feeling about it. Mm. And that's where I started to go, something's not in alignment here. I mean, we did it. We had a $130,000 turnaround in 3 years, and it felt great. But I remember saying that I would listen to a show. I'm sure you all know what show it is, where people would call in and scream that they were debt free. And I would literally get goosebumps when people would call in. And I was like, oh my gosh, like if I'm feeling this way when someone else does it, can you just imagine how I'm going to feel when this is done? And when we got done, someone's like, are you going to call in? I'm like, no, it doesn't even, like, I didn't feel that. I didn't feel it for myself the way I felt it for other people. And I think it was because it wasn't truly in alignment with what we were doing. And so it was at that moment that we decided, you know what, we are going to shift some of this. And then when I was reading stuff about different ways, I mean, I took all that I knew about, you know, the psychology of things and putting together some of the stuff with the habits and behaviors and just kind of formulated this whole thing because it felt right at the time. And I realized that's what was wrong earlier. And then it gave me a way to talk to my clients. And so that I share that because we didn't hit pause. but it wasn't in alignment. So it wasn't awesome.
And that I love these stories because I think it shows how we are all in very different places and took these journeys very differently. But we've all really kind of come to the same place in terms of we feel good with the values and the way that we're spending and investing our money, right? And the journey isn't linear, and it's not the same for everybody. And I think I've shared on past episodes, but I'll share again, when my husband and I were kind of in the depths of for me, it was very much a debt-free journey. And I'll be honest, I couldn't tell you what my values were at that point, but they changed over time, and communication, effective communication became a very core value of mine during that process, because we were following a step-by-step, very prescribed plan that's very common out on the market. And I wasn't necessarily okay with it, but I saw like this end in sight. And my husband, even though we were still going on vacation, right? We were still taking vacations. We still had Christmas. We still did these things. But for him, it wasn't creating the life that he wanted to live, right? And so going through that, just putting down the numbers and not having effective communication as one of our values, we were not, and we got to the point, to your point, Maria, we got debt free, right? We became debt free, and we felt within months we were back into debt that didn't feel right even then, because we hadn't really addressed our core values and we hadn't really put our priorities in alignment with that. And it really has turned, like, this huge shift has happened for me, that we are 100% debt free now. And that feels good. But the second time around, we've been here for a while, and that's because we did it in a way that aligned with our values and our priorities. And both of us got on the same page with that, right? And we were working towards a common. So we took his values and mine, and we put them together in a way that feels right for both of us. And I find that lacks in a lot of marriages, just because we don't talk about it a whole lot, and we don't know. Men and women feel very differently about money, right? And we have very different core values as well. And our priorities then are very different. So
I'm picking up on a common thread, maybe, and I want you guys to feel free to challenge this. But as I'm listening to you guys kind of recap that, we've all kind of started in a similar place, and then we reached different destinations, and we felt differently about those destinations. It's like, well, then what's the common thread? Because the common thread apparently isn't the program that we were all trying to adhere to. The common thread is, it sounds to me, and again, challenge us if I'm wrong, that we all went from a place of whimsy and whatever to intentionality. We got intentional with our money. Whether we intentionally are paying off debt, or intentionally pausing it to put in a backyard, or intentionally selling off all of our assets to buy an RV so that we can go and travel the country, whatever it was, the common thread seems to be intentionality.
I would absolutely agree with that. The only word I would personally switch out is whimsy. And the reason that I say that, and maybe some of us have been whimsy, but for me, it was rigidity. And it was so rigid because it was a prescribed plan. And in my mind, I'm like, it was a means to an end. And I was so focused on the end that I was willing to do the means, but I did it in such a way that was very rigid. And I traded that out for intentionality. And so there may be listeners who are being very whimsy, and they're just like, I'm not really dedicated to some of this. And so I'm moving more towards intentionality. So I would say, if you look at it on like almost like a number line, intentionality is that center balance. And on one side you have kind of like, I'm not really doing anything, or at least I'm doing it haphazardly, versus on the right side of that number line, it's like, that's the rigidity. And so no matter which side of that line you're on, or somewhere in the middle, it really, as we gravitate towards that intentionality, that's where we're going to start to really see some progress.
Yeah, I didn't like the term whimsy when it came out, because I was like looking for the real word, and I'm talking even before the program, right? So before any of us found the program and kind of decided like we need to do something different with our money, what were we doing before that? And haphazard is a good word for like maybe you just didn't know, and it's like nobody taught me this, and I don't really know how to manage money well. I know I have to pay my bills. If I want a good credit score, I better pay them on time. If I want to keep this car or keep this house, I better make the mortgage payment and the car note. So I was looking for that word, like even before we kind of realized we needed to do something, but being unintentional didn't sound like the right word either. But it's like you're just kind of moving and you don't know any better.
Yep. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think so many times we start on one spot and then we literally just swing the pendulum completely the other way. And that's probably how I ended up from haphazard to absolutely rigid, and then finally found my center, which was actual intentionality.
Yeah. Very cool.
And I think for some people, I just want to say, for me personally, I needed a little bit of rigidity because that's a place where I thrived for a short period of time. Right. And so I want to say that I think that part of that is okay if that's where your story is taking you and that's what you need, because I think there are some people, we all need some different things. Some people need a lot more flexibility to move into a different space, right? Some people need that rigidity to get to a place, but it doesn't mean that it's forever. It means it's a short period of time. And then when you recognize, okay, I've created these new habits, right? Now it's a discipline and I'm feeling really good and I'm being very intentional. So maybe that rigidity then turns into something else. Maybe it morphs into a different way of doing things, right? And that's okay.
Yep. I love the word discipline there.
As do I. Yep. The rigidity gives way to a discipline, you know, because I wish there was something else you said too, Sarah, that I wanted to kind of comment on. And that's just, I wish that we all understood that we go through seasons in our lives. You know, very little is forever, right? Like very little is, I'm going to be on this diet for the rest of my life. You know, like, I mean, sometimes, but like very little of something that we do is like, okay, well, this is how I'm going to do it for forever. And it's the same thing with our finances, especially because our financial landscape allows for those seasons. Meaning, like, if a goal is to become debt-free, well, once you are debt-free, that season is over and you have entered into a new season. You know, if you're saving up to buy a house and then you finally buy that house, like that season has shifted. So, you know, I just like highlighting the idea that our lives are kind of seasonal and we do things for a time so that we build up the right habits. And some of those habits are going to be lifelong habits, but some of those are going to shift and change because circumstances have shifted and changed.
And to both of your points, you know, that point and Maria, how you were saying, you know, kind of values kind of morph, right? And kind of compound over time. I think the same happens with, you know, seasons, and it's really about focusing on the process and not necessarily the outcome at the end, right? And so when we're looking at what do I need to do, if I'm looking at my values and my priorities, that's the process. So the outcome that happens is whatever it is, right? It might not work out the way that we thought it was going to, but because we worked on and we know that we did this in a way that really felt good because we were sticking to our values, right? And we put the priorities in place that fit those values at the time. And it's okay if the outcome, the end goal didn't necessarily happen the way we thought it was going to happen. It's okay because we used the best information that we had along the time instead of that haphazard, you know, just throwing money at it and doing this and doing that. When you can look at how did I really get here and feel good because you knew that you did everything that felt right, that's going to serve you for really the rest of your life because you've developed those habits and the knowledge and just call it a skill of checking in with yourself and saying, okay, yeah, this is working. This is great. No, this isn't. So where can I make some adjustments now? Have my values changed a little bit? Have they, you know, compounded? Do I need to go a little bit deeper with this one? And therefore then my priorities might need to be adjusted too. And that definitely falls in with what season of life we're in. So it's all very interconnected, right? There's this thread that kind of runs through everything, which is makes the process beautiful. I think it's beautiful and it's hard and it's all of it.
I think too, one thing that seems to be missing, a lot of this is abstract, right? And if there's anyone who's listening who's a concrete thinker, they're like, yeah, this is fine, but how do I know I'm in the right spot? Like, how do I measure any of this? And so I think it really is important to start to at least use this language as you're looking at your budget, as you're looking at your spending plan, as you look at what are you investing in, and ask yourself, what are some of these values that I have, and then name them. And then actually go through your numbers and say, how much of this is going towards value A, value B, value C, or you could bring priorities in here as well, but really start to lay the transparency over each other, right? So you're understanding how do I get it aligned? Because, for example, if you value, I don't know, like the idea of paying it forward, charitable stuff, and you've got $0 that are actually helping anybody else, no wonder you don't feel like you're doing what you say you want to do. And that the numbers are feedback. I always say that, numbers that's all they are. So just feedback. It's a way to measure something, but it's also a way for you to go, if I say, I want ultimately 25% of everything that I do, I want to be able to help other people. Well, what does that look like? And where are you right now? Is it 4%? Is it 0? Is it 15? Is it 40? Because if you're giving away all of your money and you can't do what you need to, that's not in alignment either. And so being able to use that language and start asking yourself, where am I over and where am I under, and how can I adjust that a little bit? Kind of like a chiropractor.
I really appreciate that example, and I want to offer up another one that I'm pretty sure, Maria, I've heard you use. It got me thinking about, so one of my values is actually one of my love languages, if you're familiar with the 5 love languages, is quality time. And, when it's like my birthday or something, I don't really much care if you get me a gift, but if you come over and we hang out and we break some bread together and play some cards, I'm over the moon. So, it got me thinking about, I think you and I were talking the other day, and you're talking about spending money at Starbucks, right? And how there's a difference when maybe you've budgeted some money to spend at Starbucks because you're meeting up with a friend or a loved one for that quality time. So it's really not about the drink or any of that. Mm-hmm. It's you're allocating those dollars for the quality time value versus if you just kind of happen to find yourself at the drive-through haphazardly and you're like, how did I end up here? So that intentionality versus that can't say that word. So not going to try a second time, but so often, like I said at the top, I just kind of look at the numbers and I'm the most practical, physical trainer money coach that I can think of, where it's just I'm just going to drill you on the things that we talked about. Oh, you don't want to spend at Starbucks? We're not spending at Starbucks. Versus, but you want to go to Starbucks to meet up with your sister because you guys haven't connected in a couple of months and quality time is important to you? Well, then you should do it for those reasons. So I just think that's another example of, it's not about the line item eating out or whatever. It's, have I allocated money to do this thing that's important to me, which is spend quality time with others?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I know your listeners probably don't know this about me because this is only my second time on your show, but I'm a homeschool mom as well. And I'm homeschooling my 9-year-old, who thinks very differently than so many other children. She's got some delays, but I think the biggest difference that I've noticed is she's 100% a concrete thinker. Now, you throw anything abstract at her, and it's going to be at least 4 days before I can help her understand that, and then we'll forget it in 2. I mean, these are some of the struggles that we're having. And so I really understand the need for concrete sometimes because of her. So when you brought that up, I'm like, you know what? Your listeners might want something that they can go home and do right now as soon as they hear this. And here's something really simple to do. You brought up the eating out. amount. I mean, that putting that in your line. One very simple tweak you can do just to get your mind thinking about some of this is make 2 line items for eating out. One of them is eating out for connection, and the other is eating out for convenience. That one shift will at least have you thinking about why are we spending these dollars? And I can tell you that I used to just have an envelope for eating out. That was it. And when it was gone, it was gone. And it usually was gone pretty quickly. And it was usually on convenience or laziness because that's just how it was. And now we separate the two so that if we end up with no money left over for dining out for convenience, well, mom has to figure out a way to make some dinner that night. But we have not let go of the idea of when we want to sit down as a family, no phones are allowed. You have to actually connect with somebody. And it could be whether it's with a family or with, friends. But ours, we have a large family of 6. And so it costs a decent amount of money to go out and eat. But we like to do that. And so we make sure that we have money built in for that connection. Again, just that one small tweak, it will at least make you think before you call your husband and say, hey, can you pick up something on the way home? Because I just haven't had the day, the time to do that today.
Yeah. I appreciate the concrete examples, and I imagine our listeners do as well. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I know for me, I would love to have you back on, Maria, in the near future. We can talk a little bit more about values in some other ways. But I think we've given our listeners enough to chew on, pun intended, since they're going to go and make a eating out for convenience and eating out for connections line item on their budget. But thank you for spending the time with us today, and I appreciate both you and Sarah just kind of leading a conversation in an area that I have to admit, I'm going to have to implement this into my own financial coaching with my clients more often.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. We'll continue this conversation next time.
Thank you for listening to the New Money Habits podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Keeping Up with the Joneses Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our host by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes. Join our growing group of like-minded people on Facebook and follow us on your favorite platform. Music provided by Summer School.